Hey everyone, I'm making this kind of spontaneous live due to some thoughts I've been having in regards to Enneagram and the dark side, the shadow, and necessary darkness. This was sparked by two things. So one, I had a conversation with my partner about the light and dark side, and well, there's one argument for having both sides. Hey, someone's watching. So the argument is that you need light and dark sides to have balance. And the funny thing is, this kind of theme was also picked up in the latest Star Wars. I think the Star Wars, was it The Last Jedi or The Force Awakens? I don't know. One of those. His argument was that you need both and you need to find the balance in between, and that actually trying to go to the light side is kind of futile. And of course I said that no, like I believe that yes, we have dark and light in us and we have it in the universe, but it's still better to strive towards the light side. Ultimately, I kind of equate, like in a late video, I also said that when I talked about the light and dark side of the functions, that lightness is life and darkness is death, and it's better to have life in the universe than not, I would assume. So I still think it's better to go to the light side, but I was thinking about it, and then today I was watching a video about, also once again, Star Wars, I think, where the talk shifted towards Jung, actually, and the shadow side, and how the idea is that you should integrate the shadow, right? This is often said, even in some MBTI circles, to integrate the shadow, and that you should not repress it, and like you should accept it as a part of you, right? Yeah, so I've been thinking about this, and I have come to the conclusion, yes, there is a purpose in having a dark side. There's a reason we have a dark side. So what does that even mean in Enneagram? I think the average to unhealthy Enneagram type descriptions illustrate the dark side, basically. So all the types, when you read them at first, usually the descriptions are very negative, and that's because they are describing the dark side. In terms of Enneagram, what kind of behavior that you exhibited was a sign of your greatest pain, your dark side, right? So type 1 usually becomes overly strict. Type 2 becomes, overly helpful to the point of really sacrificing themselves for others. And sorry, I kind of skipped for 2, the pride. Like you gain some kind of pride over that. Like you're prideful about being the helper, and then when people don't help you back, you kind of get offended. But it's just spirals downhill. And with the 3, deceit, you try to become the most successful person you can imagine, but you will resort to deceit. You will resort to deceiving people, deceiving yourself. With 4, they say envy, right? You start to overly identify with your negative feelings, and you start to see everything as lacking, everything as flawed, yourself possibly also. You can be ashamed of yourself. You create this unique identity in order to cope with that. But that doesn't really work either. With 5, you kind of it's like a bit of a stereotype. You can become like a bit of a hermit in terms of you acquire all this knowledge, you intellectualize everything, but you also become very, like they say, avarice, right? So you become very, how you say, greedy is not the right word, but it's like you hoard your information. Like your information becomes who you are in a weird way. Like with the 4, your negative feelings become who you are, and with the 5, what you know, like how you understand the world, becomes who you are. So you might overestimate your intellectual capabilities, and you don't take any action whatsoever either. With 6, the worst side, you become overly suspicious, very fear-ridden. Like, okay, so with counterphobic 6, you won't necessarily feel as much anxiety. With phobic 6, you feel more of the anxiety. With counterphobic 6, you don't really feel the anxiety per se, but you start also projecting a lot onto other people. You project that their darkness is actually your darkness. You project that your suspicions onto them. You start believing that they are the bad guys, they are the ones that are controlling you, they are the ones who are being malicious towards you. It's kind of all these paranoid worst case scenarios, or just assuming the worst in people. So the way how you might deal with it is by either running away or by attacking them. Like the counterphobic 6 is more inclined to attack. It's kind of like like seeing the devil in people and then like being scared of that and then trying to eliminate those people. That's like counterphobic 6 problems. Okay, so yeah, it's a bit weird. Okay. And with 7, dark side of 7, it's a bit weird. So with 7, you just get lost in doing all, let's say, the fun activities, the fun stuff. You project this, let's say, manic happiness almost. It's a bit like the Joker, where you cannot tell, like, even though the 7 is like smiling and laughing and being all over the place and doing all kinds of fun stuff and really going crazy, like being a hedonist, down below that is a lot of inner turmoil. And they run away from that, so they cannot handle it, so they cannot handle that inner turmoil, that inner fear of restriction. So they just keep doing what they're doing, and it's not working either. It can end up like into very stupid behavior. Like, even though 7s are often usually intelligent, type 8's dark side is actually trying to become the ultimate authority. So one of the key aspects that differentiates 6 from 8 is, 6 is, so people often think, because 8 is called the protector and the challenger, which in my opinion are not good terms for 8, because they overlap with counterphobic 6. So they think, because I challenge authority, that means I must be an 8. But actually, it's more often a sign that you are a 6. Because 6, as a super ego type, always concerned with authority in some way. So they always look at, who is currently trying to make themselves the authority? Who is the authority here? And then the 6 is kind of trying to position themselves in relation to that authority. So the phobic 6 usually submits to the authority, whereas the counterphobic 6 usually rebels against the authority. Whereas with 8 doesn't really look at, how do I put myself in relation to authority? 8 thinks they are the authority. 8 is the authority. So the 8, that's also why you often see 8s getting into leadership positions, CEO positions, because they just, when they're very dark and unhealthy, which in my opinion Harvey Weinstein was unfortunately a prime example of that, they just assume that, I'm the king. I am the authority, I'm the That's why I call 8 at the moment the dominant. Like they just assume this dominant position. Like I'm the king and I rule you, basically. Like this is what 8 does. Like 8, when they're unhealthy, they want to rule over others, they want to control others, they want to dominate others. And they often use it through, intimidation tactics or anger outbursts, I suppose. But like 6s can also have anger outbursts, but with them it's more related to fear itself. It's more related to, it's like a dog who's barking, but then when you get closer to the dog, you realize the dog's actually scared. Whereas with 8, 8 wants control. So 6s often hate, like counterphobic 6s usually hate being controlled as well, but they don't want to control other people as much. You know, like 6 is not really about being the authority, controlling other people. It's more about how they are in relation to authority. Whereas 8 is all about, I am the authority, I'm the king, I'm the leader, I'm the dominant, I'm the tyrant, and I'm gonna dominate you, basically. Like this is what unhealthy 8 does. Like Harvey Weinstein, what he did, you know, that was like a prime example of unhealthy dark side sexual 8, you know? That's just how it is. He was the king in Hollywood. He was, you know, exerting his influence, his power to control other people and to, well, like in his example also there was light side aspects as well. Like what he did with movies was light side, but obviously what he did in his private life was dark side stuff. So yeah, this is, I think, the difference between 8 and 6, really. This is how you can differentiate it, at least in my opinion, right? So, because like I said, oftentimes I hear people say, I am a challenger, I challenge authority, I hate being controlled, and these things usually are actually 6 related. Like these things are usually counterphobic 6 related. But with 8 thinks they are the authority. They think, even if they're not, and they're gonna make sure that if they're currently not considered some kind of authority or leader, they make themselves that. So then they will do their best, they will do the most in order to attain that position in the hierarchy. Whereas with 6s, it's more of a self-protection. Like 6s mostly protect themselves. They, as I said, only if they think that possibly being in a higher position gives them more security, then they might also go for it. But the 6 is not really driven by the lust for power. The 6 is rather driven by the fear of having no security, the fear of being attacked, the fear of being I guess dominated, ironically. Like 6 and 8, they can actually clash in that way. And unhealthy 9, like I said in a very old video about the zombie state, unhealthy 9 just becomes numb, tunes everything out, forgets all their problems, and just becomes like a potato. Like unhealthy 9 just becomes a potato and a vegetable. Like it's like, everything is fine, but in reality nothing is fine. That's 9 when they're unhealthy. And now you might wonder, okay, why do we even have it? Like, what's the point in having an unhealthy Enneagram type or a Darkside type? Based on my experience with the instincts and thinking about the worst I've ever been in the past, my worst state, I've come to the conclusion that the dark side comes out, like I said, oftentimes when the instincts are not met or not fulfilled. Basically, when your human instinctual needs are not fulfilled adequately, you go into your dark side, and technically the dark side becomes, I always say it's like a warning sign. It's like basically your psyche telling you something is wrong and you need to do something about it. Now, many people are so unaware that they don't realize this. So what often happens is people don't get their needs met, then they become unhealthy, then they become darker and darker, and they don't do anything about it, so it becomes worse and worse and worse until, well, in fiction it usually results in death, right? Like the villain usually dies. So what happens, either the villain dies, which you could say is like some ego death, or the villain becomes good, right? Like these are just the two outcomes of villains. And the villain is basically just a representation of the dark side, right? They also talk a lot about that in Star Wars, how Darth Vader is technically like the dark side version of Luke and all that stuff, right? So to bring it back to Enneagram, I really think that if you want to type yourself, the best way, I mean, okay, maybe not the best way, but one of the ways you can do that is by really looking at which of the types describes my dark side the best. So what I see oftentimes is like counterphobic 6s, they read the type 8 description and they think, okay, I am also moody and I think being powerful is kind of cool, so I'm just going to type myself as an 8. So it's like this idealized version. So also when I see people typing themselves based on some kind of idealized version of the type, then it's usually a mistype, right? Because they're not actually typing their real dark side. They're just typing something they want to be. Which I guess is not always the worst, but it's not really that helpful. So you really realize oftentimes what your Enneagram type is once you become very dark, right? So once you become very unhealthy and you don't meet your instinctual needs, this is usually when people go into the dark side. And so I kind of described it. So once again, what's the point of that, right? Like I said, the point of going into the dark side is so that your needs get fulfilled. So your human self is kind of trying to tell you that you need to change something. You need to change something about your life. Otherwise, you're gonna die. That's kind of how it goes. Like so a lot of this is, you can say, just tied to survival, right? So let's say, to give a more concrete example, let's say the worst that can happen to you is let's say your romantic partner dies, or you are single for a very long time and you cannot find anybody, so then the sexual instinct is not fulfilled. You don't have any friends, you're totally isolated from society, no one likes you, no one cares about you, then the social instinct is also not fulfilled. And then self-preservation, you are on the street, you have no money, you have nothing, you are totally without any preservation at all. No house, no clothes, no food, nothing of that sort. So then also your self-preservation is in the dumps. So this is an example of where all the instincts are not met, and usually what happens is people become dark, right? People resolve to crime, people become criminals, people are very jaded, they just become very dark, and that's just what happens when your instinctual needs are not fulfilled. So this is like the extreme example, but what basically happens is, in terms of Enneagram, you're gonna get into the worst part of your Enneagram type. A 4 is gonna really indulge in their feelings, develop their identity to an extreme amount, really setting themselves apart. But oftentimes this does not even help them get their needs met. Like they may become really envious, they may feel like everything is lacking. But the problem with many Enneagram types and many people is, as I said, because they're unconscious, even if they go into the dark side, they might not realize it's just a warning sign. It's like telling you have to do something about this. Like bad feelings some types or some people are also inclined to avoid bad feelings, for example. Stereotypically positive types, but also avoidant attachment, I would say, is inclined to avoid bad feelings. But actually bad feelings, yes, they have a purpose. But if you don't acknowledge them as a warning sign, then they become useless. And this is what you see with unhealthy 4, for example, where they really indulge in the negative feelings. You also see it with like all emotionally real types to some extent. So also even with 6s and 8s, that can also happen. They really indulge in these negative, soul-crushing feelings. But it becomes like not useful. Like it just goes to the extreme where you are indulging these negative feelings and you're not using them to change your life. So then you will just become worse, right? Like my argument is still that we should strive towards the light side, because then you will be rewarded with feeling fulfilled. It kind of goes hand in hand. Like true fulfillment on a very almost spiritual level, or let's say just on an instinctual level, really just comes from fulfilling your instincts. And your Enneagram type can be a way of showing you when your instincts are not fulfilled, when you're in the dark side, or on the flip side, if you're on the light side. The light side version of your Enneagram type is basically showing you the most ideal way you will be able to fulfill your instincts. But it's not always, how you say, like when you're on the dark side, indulging in your negative Enneagram traits does not usually help. Okay, what was my point again? Oh, right. But still, like, even though we do aim towards the light side, even though we do aim towards life and survival, right, there's still death. So we still, we strive towards becoming better. We strive towards fulfilling our instincts. We strive towards, just making humanity better. But then, at the end, we still die, right? We still die. So then what's the point of that, right? I was also thinking about that. I think this is also a bit tied to my own experience. By the way, if you're having any comments, please comment down below. And I cannot read any comments right now. I don't see any. So if you haven't said anything, that's fine. But if you have, I'm sorry. It just doesn't pop up on my screen. Okay, so in my experience, it ties in with the lesson you get from fiction where the villain dies, right? So the villain dies. Death is necessary, obviously. At least with our life form, it is necessary to give space or the opportunity for an improved human to emerge, right? So at least this is the ideal, or this is what people want. Or this is, what people want, what evolution wants. That may sound a bit weird, but yeah. So when the villain dies, or when ego death. So I was also thinking about ego death and my own ego death. When I look back, I realized that I had to, my old self had to die for my better self to emerge, right? And this goes hand in hand with the whole thing about death and the villain dying in stories. So my worst self basically had to die, or my old self had to die to become something else. Now, but the thing is, even good people die, right? Even people who are very, let's say, advanced also die. So that's the thing. Even if you have an ego death, it can go either way. And you also see that obviously with children or with offspring. Your children can turn out better than you or even worse than you. In stories, the villain dies and everyone is happy, right? But in real life, what can happen is even your good self can die and you can turn into the dark self. But also your dark self can die and you can turn into the good self, and vice versa, right? So it's a happy coincidence, and it's ideal if your ego dies when it is very dark and unhealthy. But it's not always guaranteed. So This is why I still think we have to strive towards the light side and strive towards fulfilling our instincts. I don't think it's good to be in some kind of limbo and meet your needs. And if you want to go to Jungian type, I would also add that your Jungian type also shows you how you best meet your needs based on your Jungian type, like what your strengths are, and following that, and then you can meet your needs that way, and then you become healthier, more fulfilled, you go to the light side, all the good stuff. So yeah, and yeah, it's an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing, well, in the negative way you can say struggle, in the positive sense you can say journey or path. So yeah, it's ongoing, but it's necessary.